Economics, lecture 20. We are at the topic of growth. I'll make first 5 minutes of very simple, elementary big picture. You have to understand the big picture, and the big picture is phenomenally simple. Come on guys, lecture begin, okay? So, the big picture is as follows. Credit can be increased in only one of two ways. Either there was savings, so with savings, or there was no savings, without savings. So, when people save, a new genuine credit can be extended. And if people do not save, credit can be still extended, and we have a name for that. How do we call credit which is extended without the backing of savings? Yes, it's part of fractional. It could happen in a fractional reserve banking, but it's called credit expansion. Credit expansion. Alright, so when credit is backed by savings, then you get, that's the big picture, economic growth. And when credit is backed by nothing, in other words, without savings, different way of stating it, credit expansion leads to business cycles. The business cycle has two phases. The first one is called a boom, and the second one is called a bust. And there could be an intermediate in between, the transition period between boom and bust, to be called a crisis. Now, the point to remember and understand is that the key feature of economic growth driven by savings is that economic growth is sustainable. The boom represents an expansion and at least a temporary growth of the economy. But the boom, in general, the business cycle is characterized as being unsustainable. When driven by genuine savings, sustainable simply means that it can go on for an indefinite period of time. It can go on forever. Unsustainable means that the boom can never go forever, and the unsustainable means that it must necessarily end. And when it ends with a crisis and turns into a bust. Alright? So, this is the big picture, and from this big picture, today we're going to focus on economic growth, and next week we're going to be focusing on the business cycle. In economic growth, we see how and why growth occurs, and in the business cycle, we see why the boom can never last forever. No matter how much politicians, businessmen, or ordinary people want. Alright? Any questions? Any? No. Alright, let me wipe this off and move on to growth. So, basically growth comes out of one very simple thing, and this is lower time preferences. In other words, consumers and businessmen lower their time preference. What does it mean? In other words, causes. So the question is, how do lower time preferences occur? Well, the first very simple way that it occurs, or is caused by, is consumers simply decide to consume less and to save more. Consumers save more. The second standard way through which time preferences will be lowered is by businesses saving more. Well, how do we call the savings of a business?
Investment.
Oh, yes, it is investment, that's true, but first of all, we gotta say where the investment comes from, or the savings come from. They come from profits. And the profits which are not consumed through dividends. In other words, if a business makes 1,000 of a profit, the owner may get for himself or distribute to the other owners in the form of dividends 300, and the rest will be reinvested in the business. So, whenever it is distributed to owners through dividends or otherwise, it will be, or the assumption is it is actually consumed. So, the other way for businesses is, the other type of true, genuine saving for businesses is to increase reinvestments or reinvested profits. So, consumers save more, businesses reinvest more of their profits. Alright? This is known in finance as the plowback ratio. How much you produce and how much of what you produce or profit you plow back into the business. So these two are the causes, okay? Now we move on causes 1 and 2. Now we move on to consequences. Consequences, of course, is the same as results or effects. Okay? So let's take a good look and see what we have. Number 1 is increase in supply of present goods. So, supply of present goods excuse me, is increasing. In other words, people produce and they produce a whole bunch of things, but consumers are willing to consume less. So the overall supply of present goods go up. More coffees are offered relative, again, present goods relative to demand, okay? Number 2 is trivial. This is trivial. Savings are increased. That's the second effect. And the third effect is a trivial consequence of the second, that of lending is increased. Why lending would increase? Well, that's trivial, because savings are increased. The assumption is that savings re-enter the financial system. Once they re-enter the financial system, maybe people will buy more bonds, will buy more stock, or will just deposit it in the bank and the bank will re-lend it. Whatever the case, lending, overall lending will increase. Simple as that. And now we have, because of these consequences, we have, let's draw the line here. We have 3 fundamental effects, and those three effects drive economic growth. So the rest of the day I will try to explain those three effects or three mechanisms through which increased present goods, savings and lending result in growth. So the first effect is higher or relatively higher losses in consumer goods and relatively little losses in capital goods. Why would that occur? Very simple. Consumers are consuming less shampoo, less electricity, less paper, less whatever. If consumers are consuming less, the profitability of consumer goods will fall. Actually, because demand of consumer goods falls, prices of consumer goods fall. And if prices of consumer goods fall, profitability of producers of consumer goods fall, or it may turn to outright losses. So that's number one. Number two is fairly trivial. Interest rates fall. So, when savings increase, the supply of savings increases, but supply of savings is identical to supply of capital. So when supply of capital increases, the price of capital goes down. Well, the price of capital is simply interest rate. Alright? So interest rates fall. And three, real wages rise. Real wages. The key here is that nominal wages don't have to rise. But because consumer good prices fell, you were making before 1,000, you're making now 1,000, price of bread fell from $2 to $1, the purchasing power of your wage increased. Well, the purchasing power of a wage is called real wage. So real wage is the same as the purchasing power of wages. So this is the nominal wage divided by the price level. Alright? So wages increase. This effect has been noticed 200 years ago by a great British economist. His name is David Ricardo. So this particular effect is known as the Ricardo effect in the literature. Ricardo effect. So, the step was number one, people lower their time preferences, either because they save more or reinvest more. This results in increase in savings, increase in the supply of present goods, increase in savings, and increase in lending. The three effects are that there are relatively high losses in consumer goods, interest rates fall, and real wages or the purchasing power wages increases. And now what I'm going to spend most of this lecture is to explain these three separately, how each of these leads to economic growth. Any questions before I move to one? Any? Okay, question?
Why does the supply of present goods increase?
Because producers produced 1 million toothpastes and 1 million whiteboard markers. And consumers, including businesses, decided to consume less and reinvest more. So demand for bread, gasoline, whiteboard markers drops relative to supply. Again, the supply of present goods essentially will mean that we can shift. Now I can use this whiteboard marker not today, but tomorrow, or maybe next year. Alright?
But if demand is less, supply should be less, isn't it?
Nobody said supply should be less. Nobody says supply should be less. What we're saying is that if there will be equilibrium between demand and supply, when demand drops, nobody said supply should be less. All we're saying is that the price will drop to equate. In other words, the present good will be used as an investment for the future. In other words, you have a present good of wheat. We're not going to consume the wheat, but we're going to carry the wheat next year. And next year we're going to have higher inventories of wheat. Next year we don't have to produce as much wheat as we did this year. And we could use all of those workers that were producing wheat to produce something else. I don't know, cars, laptops, whatever you are using, pens, papers, printers, whatever consumers would want to use. So this is kind of like effect number one. Let's elaborate on number one. So, number one effect. Let's see, what do I have for it? The first note is that number one is losses are only for a small portion of the economy. Okay, let's explain this. Consumer goods, remember from last time, are a tiny portion of the whole economy. I mean, bread is a little portion. You got a lot of wheat going on. Before that, you have a lot of grains, mills, etc., fertilizer, tractors, machines, and equipment. So, because demand for consumer goods falls, the profitability of these consumer goods will fall, but the overall for the economy, losses will be relatively small. That's number one. Alright, number two, which is of course perfectly logical, is prices of consumer goods will necessarily fall, as I just explained to you, simply because their demand fell, okay? As a result, whoever is producing consumer goods will be facing lower profitability. So, profitability of consumer goods drops or falls. Well, here is now the next key. If you produce consumer goods and producer goods, meaning capital goods, if the relative profitability of consumer goods falls, it follows mathematically, it must be the case that the relative profitability of capital goods rises. How is that? Well, let's say consumer goods profitability is 10%, capital goods profitability is 10%. If the profitability of consumer goods falls to 4%, now capital goods are still bringing 10, but these are bringing 4. So capital goods productivity rises relative to lower consumer good productivity. So another effect is that profitability of capital goods, I mean these are machines, equipment, trucks, factories, refining capacity, real estate, parking lots, garages, shopping malls, electricity wires, all of this stuff, capital goods, productivity will increase. Well, you're a businessman. You see you have two businesses. One is producing toothpaste, profitability drops. The other one is producing construction, whose relative productivity increases. What is the natural result of now the differential of profitability between consumer goods and capital goods? Number one, investments in consumer goods falls. This is perfectly logical. Hey, toothpaste don't bring as much profits. Let's not invest much more. So, relative to the previous profitability, At the same time or simultaneously, the investments in capital goods will increase. Well, we are now experiencing a similar case where it is much more profitable to build houses, construction, shopping malls. I mean, we have a craze for shopping malls. We're building all sorts of long-term assets, in other words, capital goods. Well, if the investments in the one falls and in the other increases, the result next will be, what is it? Release productive resources from consumer goods into capital goods. So release, and I might add shift productive resources. Well, which are these productive resources?
Labor force?
Yes, labor, capital, land, and we might add, if you wish, technology, know-how. Well, know-how is just human capital. Alright? So, what will happen is the lower productivity of consumer goods, workers, land and capital will be released on the market. Well, this is causing temporary unemployment. But the most important point to understand is that just because some industry became relatively less profitable, and workers and resources were released on the market, it does not mean that these resources will remain unemployed forever. They'll find a different job. So whatever became more profitable, like real estate construction, you know, the accountant will move into accounting and real estate. Worker will move into, I don't know, painting, whatever. So resources will shift from lower order capital goods, we call these consumer goods, to high order capital goods, which is just capital goods, okay? Are the steps so far clear? Any questions at this point? Alright, so let's see what the... So, let's kind of use the same restrict... Okay, hold on. Let me try to do this. So the signal, the price signal here is restricting investments in consumer goods and it's stimulating investments in these goods. So let's try to get a number of effects. Number of effect one is shifting of resources from lower to higher. Number two is lengthens the production structure. Alright, so if resources are released from low order capital goods, they cannot go anywhere else but somewhere in the higher order capital goods. So people that were selling in a store will now become construction workers and build a house or build a shopping mall or build a factory. Or they will be released and they'll go into a mine and start mining gold, silver, copper, zinc, whatever. Alright, so lengthens the production structure is the one big result. But there is another very important result, and that is that production becomes more capital intensive. So capital intensity goes up. Why is that? Because now you have more investments in high order capital goods. This will mean in introductory macro course, you are producing more tractors, you're producing more trucks, you're producing more machines, you're producing, for your case, more laptops. So everybody's got a more laptop. How or what would be a lengthening of the production structure for your case as students? You'll have laptops and you'll have a connection, internet connection, through Ethernet to the internet. A lengthening will be to add a new technology, wireless, and now you can connect anywhere without having to plug. Now you can move your laptop around, you got 20 minutes, you can turn on your laptop, connect through wireless. So all of these things meaning capital intensity. Now let's explain this word capital intensity in a different way in order to be sure that you make the connection with the last lecture. Capital intensity refers simply to the quantity of capital available per one worker. So capital per worker. A different way of saying it is the capital, number one, per worker, and number two is the capital / labor ratio. Alright? So whether we say capital labor ratio, whether we say capital per worker, or whether we say capital intensity, it is the same thing. And one last note to make a connection from the last lecture is, if you would remember the picture where we had capital per worker here, and you had output per worker, remember we had the chart which goes like this. All that this is saying is that all that we did was have some capital per worker, and that capital, due to the savings, increased. So, as a result, output per worker increases. Alright? So, this capital per worker is the same thing as capital intensity. Is that fairly clear? Alright, so now we have as a number 7, if capital intensity or capital per worker increases, the next result must be, as shown on the picture, the similar logic applies, that productivity increases. Okay? So, everybody's got more machines. You got 10 farmers, they had 10 machines, now they have 20 machines. You have, let's say, 500 students in this university, you have 400 laptops, now you guys got 800 laptops. You go in your room, you got a laptop, you come in the lab, you got a laptop, you go to the other building, you got a laptop, so no matter where you are, you always got a laptop, and finally, you can, just bring it anywhere you wish and still connect to the internet. The result is higher productivity, and this, note now how I'm using here this sign, which is kind of like mathematically equivalent to higher productivity, is mathematically equivalent to higher economic, let's try to do this, growth. Now let's explain this sign here. Higher productivity certainly means or implies higher growth. Is that fairly clear? But there's the other way around. Higher growth necessarily implies higher productivity. In other words, you cannot get higher growth unless you get higher productivity. And vice versa. If you increase productivity, growth also increases. So, each implies the other. That, in other words, mathematically, they are equivalent. Alright? Is this fairly clear? Question?
When studying the graph last time, we have
said that increasing the capital for worker doesn't necessarily mean increasing in productivity.
Now it means, well, it actually does. So for any amount, again, this is product per worker. Okay, let's try to rewrite this. This, remember what this Y was? This was output per worker. Well, output per worker is simply called productivity, or productivity of labor. Alright? So essentially it means higher labor productivity. Again, the technical term is increased labor productivity. Okay? So that will be Y is equal to labor productivity, or productivity of labor. Well, this of course refers to the marginal product of labor for a given capital. Again. Alright, so any more questions before I move to number 2? Any more questions? Alright, let's move to number 2. I'm going to wipe this off. So the first effect was that of losses. Effect number 2 is lower interest rates. Alright, so number 2, interest rates fall. So when interest rates fall, you have a number of effects. Let's see what is the effect. Number 1, long-term assets. Long-term assets are more profitable. In other words, you have one asset, some sort of a short-term asset, I don't know, a printer. You use a printer for 2 years, you throw it away. The alternative to a printer is a shopping mall. You use for 50 years a shopping mall before you tear it apart and build a new shopping mall. Or a garage, or a parking lot. So, when you have falling interest rates, you will get a much higher and increased profitability of a garage and shopping mall rather than a printer. Why? Because with lower interest rates, you can benefit essentially only for 2 years with the printer. So, 1 year you benefit from the reduced interest rate, and the second year you benefit from the reduced interest rate. On the other hand, with a lower interest rate for a garage for 50 years, you can benefit for 50 years in a row from the lower interest rate. So the profitability of long-term assets increases. So the longer the overall life of the asset, and that will be of course a capital good, the higher the profitability. So, lower interest rates will raise the profitability of the highest order capital goods. Again, machines, equipment, trucks, refineries, mines, and whatnot. So, that is number 1. Number 2 is there is another effect which is called discount factor. When you have some future cash flows, you get a garage and, for example, there is no inflation, you're going to get this year 1 million, next year 1 million, next year 1 million, next year 1 million, so for 30 years you get 1 million cash flow. Each year's cash flow you're discounting by the interest rate plus, remember from last time, the risk of the investment. So if the interest rate is like risk-free interest rate is 3%, you put in some risk, 1 or 2% risk premium, so you discount by 5%. When the overall interest rates fall, because you're discounting less, the discount factor falling means that the capital value increases. In other words, you have a truck, a $100,000 truck. Different way to think about it, you borrowed in order to finance that truck. You're not paying 10%, but you're paying 5%. Whatever you're getting out of the truck, your costs your costs go down. And therefore, your profit increases. And when you add the profits overall for any assets, you get its capital value. Okay? So the capital value increases. So lower interest rate will mean that housing prices go up, the prices of trucks go up, the prices of any long-term assets will go up. Well, if prices go up, this means that profitability of building the capital increases. You see, I'm now talking about two different things. The first one is the profitability of the garage increases. The profitability of the house increases. Now I'm talking about a different thing. The profit to actually get to the ground and build a full garage increases. In other words, the first one is the gains of the investor. But the second one is the construction company building the garage and profitability increases. In Bulgaria, for example, as demand for houses has gone up, the cost of producing real estate was around 150 euro per square meter. Well, prices went up from 300 euro a meter to 400 to 500, now to 1,000. So, you're a construction business, you're making phenomenal profits in construction. You make it for 150, you sell it for 850. You're making like 5, 6, 8 times your money. So, what is going to be the result? Everyone's going to rush and become a real estate construction company, real estate builder. So, the result is investments. So, investments in capital goods. And here's the key. Longer term capital goods will rise significantly. So everyone is now rushing to build shopping malls, garages, parking lots, and of course real estate. Commercial real estate and residential real estate. This is because their profitability was driven substantially higher because both prices went up and at the same time interest rates or costs went down. Alright, is this explanation so far clear, guys? Any questions? Alright, let's see now what happens then. Well, number one, it is a result of this production structure widens. Widening production structure simply means you have more capital goods of the same capital goods than before. You guys were 800 students with 300 computers. Now you have 800 computers. And over time you're going to have 1,500 computers. This is widening the production structure. You know, farmers had 10 tractors. Now they're going to be having 20 tractors. So that's one type of widening. But there will be a completely different effect. And a completely different effect will be of lengthening. Lengthening the production structure. Lengthening the production structure would mean that you will add some more technology, some more capital, and further add productivity. Of course, everyone is productive when you plug in your laptop to the wall, right, to the Ethernet, and you can use the internet. But your productivity will increase when there is the capital investment of creating a hotspot for using a wireless, and two, when you have your wireless connectivity plugged to your laptop, so just open it up and use it. So by adding new technology, so in farming, how would it work? You have threshers, you have combines, you have tractors. Well, you're the farmer, you add a milking machine. You have a whole bunch of cows. Now you buy a milking machine, it will, increase your overall productivity on the milking side of, your farm. So it also lengthens the production structure. Why? Well, let's provide an example, a different type of example. As interest rates fall from 10% to 5%, the cost, for example, of borrowing in order to develop a mine is never a 1 or 2 year project. It's usually a 10 to 20 year project. When you gotta borrow, let's say, $10 million to get that mine going. And if you have to borrow at 10%, your annual cost will be $1 million. An annual cost of $1 million for your capital, the mine will not be profitable. But if interest rates fall from 10% to 5%, you're still going to borrow the 10 million, but now your annual payment will be not 1 million, but $500,000. And you're saying, oh, with a $500,000 of cost of capital or interest rate, the mine will be more productive. So the point is that lowering interest rate will add or make some other investment projects that before were not productive will now make them productive. So it will add new and other investment projects, of course, with the released resources from consumer goods. So this is the lengthening the production structure. And then number 6 is shockingly simple. If you're going to be widening the production structure and lengthening the production structure, it must be necessarily that productivity will increase, and without an explanation, equivalent to growth going up. Is that fairly straightforward, guys? Some of you are smiling, having fun. Alright, so now I gotta go through number 3 and then close the lecture with a number of general comments related to these 3 effects. 3. Wages increase, okay? Real wages increase. So number 1 effect is fairly straightforward. This is the most simple and logical of all. Labor becomes more expensive. That was, okay, question.
Why do real wages increase? Because consumer goods became cheaper.
Yes, real wages increased because, as I explained already, whatever the workers were getting, 1,000, they are facing lower prices of the consumer goods.
But what about capital goods?
Well, but the point is now they can buy, let's say, 1,000 toothpaste rather than 600. They can buy 2,000 loaves of bread rather than 1,000. They can buy more consumer goods. Again, we measure real wages with their purchasing power. How many consumer, how many pairs of glasses, how many whiteboard markers or sheets of paper or pens or shirts, whatever you're buying, all right? So, labor becomes relatively more expensive simply because the real wage went up. Now, here is the other trick which I used before in economic logic is if labor becomes relatively more expensive, there is also that capital becomes relatively, instead of more, I'll just say cheaper. Number 1, capital becomes cheaper or relatively cheap to labor simply because labor went up. But capital becomes cheaper for a completely different reason, which is, yes, interest rates went down. This is because interest rates went down, which also made capital cheaper. So, 2 different reasons why. Okay, question.
But Professor, from the previous effect, we can say that estate prices are going up, so these wages increased relatively.
Well, yes, they are relatively. There's no question that they are relatively, but at least they are, well, now at least we're looking at consumer goods, you know. We're still looking at consumer goods. They're buying bread and wheat and they just rent the apartment, all right? I mean, we're not, because now you're getting into consumers trying to invest. And then, you know, the analysis becomes messy. Well, let's just allow them to eat, sleep, drink, and consume whatever they want to consume rather than what you guys call invest in houses, all right? So, now let's try to see out of 1 and 2, there will be something perfectly logical. What will entrepreneurs doing if they are facing much more expensive labor and a lot cheaper capital? What are they going to be doing? Use capital instead of labor. So we call this in economics substitute, right? There will be a substitution. So substitute. So they will substitute labor for capital. In other words, they will reduce the quantity of workers and the quantity of workers simply because their price went up. And they will increase the quantity of capital because capital became cheaper. Substitute labor for capital. Oh, how do we call this thing when you're reducing the number of workers, but at the same time increasing the quantity of capital? Yeah, we call it mechanization, we call it automation, meaning not we, the engineers, but in economics, how do we call this thing? Yes, intensity, we call it, where is it here? Capital intensity increases. So, here is the key again. Capital intensity increases. Now you're also having the wireless and your laptop with a wireless connection. So now you can work more while you're waiting for me for the lecture, you know, for the 5 minutes, rather than just chat. You can actually open your laptop and download that handout and actually, you know, discuss it and get prepared before. Or, well, the modern generation wouldn't do that. Modern generation would just check its email, right? You got 5 minutes, let's see who's sent me an email, what they're saying. Anyway, in either case, you could use your time more productively because you have better capital and more diversified. And then, let me see if I'm missing anything. Let's try to do this. Let's try to do this. There is another effect which is kind of like the two of them. Again, similar to below. You actually widen and lengthen the production structure. Widen means, again, we were all using laptops and computers. Now everybody's got more laptops than computers. And lengthen means you are all using the laptops only hardwired to Ethernet. Now you're using them also wireless everywhere. And of course, this means number 3, the same old story as before. Productivity. Of course, if you lengthen the production structure and widen it, widen and lengthen again implies more capital per worker. Productivity increases and therefore growth increases. We have how much time? 15 minutes, is it? Yes, 15 minutes. I will finish everything in about exactly 15 minutes. Any questions before I get some other stuff to finish? Any questions on these 3 effects? No? Wow, this was miraculous. Alright, let me wipe off and get some general comments and notes. So, all I was explaining so far were the 3 mechanisms through which, growth occurred. Now let's see what is overall common and make some general notes about it. Note number 1. So, 1. For all 3 cases, growth occurred with or without increase in money supply? Without. So, growth. And here's the key. Without, let's call it simply inflation, right? Now, a different way of stating the same thing is that you do not need inflation in order to get or to generate growth. Simple as that, okay? Second, consumer prices of consumer goods went down. That is okay. But here is the key. Remember with the wheat, we were consuming less wheat and we were having more for future periods. We also temporarily lowered the output of wheat. As we are shifting those same workers to produce fertilizers, to produce tractors, and to produce other, let's say, agricultural capital goods, within a period of time, maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 3 years, productivity will kick in from more fertilizers, from more tractors and whatnot. The overall supply of consumer goods will actually go up over time, right? 2 or 3 years. So, initially consumer prices went down, but as the growth expands and more consumer goods are supplied on the market, it must necessarily be with no increase in money supply that consumer prices will continue to fall as the economy grows. Okay? Well, this is what happened throughout the Industrial Revolution, right? They were on the gold standard. Money supply was relatively fixed. It was growing roughly at 1%. So as they increased productivity for practically anything that, touched the Industrial Revolution, prices of everything went down. I mean, shirts and pants and all sorts of cooking ware and whatever. So, consumer prices fall and prices continue to fall. Consumer prices continue to fall. So, the most important lesson, which journalists don't understand and politicians usually love, is to say that growth drives prices higher. It is impossible. When you're having a fixed amount of money and you produce more, the only thing that can happen is that prices fall. So, you never should believe that growth drives or causes prices to higher. Like now they're saying Chinese growth is causing oil prices to go up. That's nonsense. You'll never have to believe, okay? Oh, this guy's surprised. Go ahead. I'm listening.
But why not? Because they're making demand higher.
Okay, they're making demand higher, but here's the key. Where is the demand coming from? And okay, let me try. This is what I was listening actually on Monday before, 4 days ago. On CNBC, the news was, do you know whose fault was for the rising oil and agricultural prices and overall consumer inflation? On TV, you had like 5 economists. I mean, these are, Wall Street banks like Merrill Lynch, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs and whatnot, and some other great economists, and they all said it is the fault of Chinese because they're driving demand for all of these consumer goods and, in general commodities prices higher. And it was the fault of who else, you guess? Indians, because they were also demanding all these commodities, including agricultural. And it was the fault of Arab sheiks and Arabs that were pumping out oil, and what is dead wrong with this argument? What is dead wrong with their argument that it's the fault of Chinese, Indians, and oil exporting countries that are buying big time oil, driving its price up? What is wrong with this argument? Come on guys, very simple.
The oil doesn't increase, it stays the same.
Well, yeah, no, that's not it. Well, the simple question you must always counter is, how in the world they get the money to pay for it? I mean, they're buying copper, they're buying wheat. Where do they get the money? The Chinese are not printing the money, and the Indians are not printing the money. The point is that they cannot possibly pay the higher prices unless they're getting more money out of somewhere. Well, how could they even possibly get more money if the money supply is more or less fixed? Well, the answer is, it is impossible. Mathematically, you cannot just keep getting more and more money unless the United States was inflating in the first place. You understand? So, in other words, the United States inflates, prints money, pays for Indian, Chinese goods, and then the Chinese are trying to spend the money back. The problem was not that they're driving demand for oil. The problem, the original sin, was that the US was printing phenomenal amount of money in order to pay for Chinese goods in the first place. Okay?
So their money supply was going up.
Which one?
Money supply.
Yes, money supply was going up. But the point to understand is that the cause for rising oil prices is that the money supply went up in the first place. Not that the Chinese were just buying more. Again, if they're paying with dollars, how do they get more dollars to pay, right? So, the answer is, it is not the Chinese fault. Chinese are not at fault because they produced more, better goods. They were able to sell them at a good, meaning worldwide competitive price. This is not their fault. The fault was with the US, meaning the currency of payment, which increases its money supply, and they simply accumulate more. Again, if the United States was not printing more, they could not have possibly accumulated more dollars in order to pay higher prices. Okay? Is that fairly clear? That's basic stuff. Let's get some more, because I still have to finish today. Alright, so number 3, which is very important, is that, let me see to be sure that I have it. Each effect works separately. In other words, effect number 1 works whether 2 is there or not there, whether 3 exists or it doesn't exist. So, it may be that one of the effects doesn't work, the other 2 will still continue to work because the effects are not dependent on each other. The mechanism was completely different. Number 4, which is related to number 3, which I did not develop in this lecture, the textbook develops a couple of pages on it, is that each effect enhances the other 2. The other 2 effects. In other words, effect 1 works alone, but if effect 2 is also at work, it increases the effect of effect 1, right? But 1 is working, it increases the effect of effect 2. In other words, they enhance each other up. So that's an important point. Let's see. I did this. The next one is straightforward. I explained it in all 3. It is common to all 3. Is that productive resources shift from consumer to capital goods. Remember one thing, the most elementary thing in economics when we started in day 1 was that productive resources, like any economic resource, is scarce. And if it is scarce, the only way that it can increase output is by reallocating the scarce resources in a better, more productive way. So, what was absolutely necessary is, whatever the scarce resources are, that you shift them into a more productive way. Shockingly simple, but it's usually misunderstood. This is, of course, a myth which is still common today practically throughout all politicians, all journalists, and many economists. Remember, the very beginning that we started was that consumers consume less. This is popularly known amongst politicians, and back in the old days, for well over 200 years, it had its name. Anybody? Underconsumption. So, back in the old days, they called this somehow lowering of consumer demand underconsumption. And here is the key to understand. Underconsumption causes growth. It is the cause, it is the driver of growth. Drives growth. Yet many people, journalists, politicians, and some economists say that underconsumption causes the economy to be stagnant. Their argument is producers produce, consumers don't want to consume. The result is producers produce less. And that's the end of the story. Well, that is extremely naive and childish. The answer is yes, they will produce less toothpaste, but they will shift to produce wireless. And 1,000 students in this university will eagerly buy a wireless connection for, I don't know, 10 bucks or 20 bucks. So the point is different. They were not initially producing what the consumers demanded, and they will shift to produce other things that consumers are willing. It is not causing stagnation in the economy. It just says that they have to reshuffle the resources, the scarce resources, in a better way. Okay? Is that fairly clear? Alright, what's next? Oh, this is nice. This is nice. Profitability. Does it go up or does it go down? Profitability. For all three effects.
For which good? For which good?
Overall, corporate, production.
Goes up.
No, the answer is it does go down. That's surprising, right?
But how?
How could it be?
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's get the second part because it is extremely counterintuitive. Let's make it more intuitive, right? So I'm going to be explaining two pieces at the same time. What is profitability? Definition. It is a profit per unit of capital. So, for $1,000, how much profit you make. But here is the second part of the piece. Nevertheless, corporate profits go up. Let's try. This is the part that you guys all understand perfectly, in that you mistake rising profits in a growth environment with rising profitability. The answer here is that profits are part of two things. Number one is profitability on a unit of capital times the quantity of capital times capital. In other words, the profitability of one. Let's try to use laptops. Back in the old days, a computer will cost will sell for 1,000, and the cost will be 600. The computer maker will be making 400 per unit. All right. Well, as the computer maker expands output, the computer maker could easily double output and sell them instead of 1,000 for 900. Profitability per unit falls from 400 to 300, but because the quantity of computers doubled, the total profit or the overall profit increased. Well, furthermore, computer maker could triple or quadruple the quantity of computers by simply selling them instead of 900 for 800. So, profitability drops further from 300 to 200, but if you quadruple the quantity, the overall profit will continue to rise. Alright? Well, this is just called, in economics, economies of scale. The more you produce, the cheaper it becomes per unit. Well, what is the source of economies of scale? It is simply higher productivity. Okay? So, the same thing happens. The overall profitability, meaning the return per unit of capital, increases. But remember, in a growth, you will have a capitalist who in 4 or 5 years will double his overall capital. Alright? So, he would have, let's say, 1 factory. 5 years from now, he's going to have 2 factories. In the 1 factory, he would be making 1 million profit. Now, his profitability per factory will fall, let's say, to 800,000. But he's got 2 factories and he's going to be making 1.6 million. So, profitability per factory will fall, but now he's got 2 factories, his profits will rise. Not quite double, but almost. Is this kind of like increase? Now, why would profitability fall? I didn't really quite explain, right? The answer is profitability per unit of capital will fall because it also falls per unit of output. In other words, growth and what is it? Time? Is it time?
On base.
Yes, okay, well, that's also another way of saying it, that because of increasing capital, the marginal product of capital falls. In other words, due to diminishing returns. But a better way to think about it is, hey, we were having certain machines and, because we had to increase the overall quantity, we had to lower the price. In other words, the overall lowering of the price of output ultimately drives the profitability per unit of capital lower. Alright? So that's the explanation. The other explanation is completely different. It comes out of microeconomics. In microeconomics, you have that in a competitive environment, profits equal costs. In other words, the profit, the economic profit is 0. Competitive profits are 0. So, the return on capital equals the cost of capital. Well, the cost of capital is interest rates. So when interest rates fall, in a competitive environment, the return of capital must fall back to the cost of interest. In other words, in a growth, we are assuming here competitive environment. Let me try, how much more time? No time, right? Let me see 1 or 2 more pieces. Actually, the one last piece is, again, straightforward. We covered it on lecture, 2 or 3. Productivity, higher productivity, which is increasing, which is mathematically equivalent to growth. I'm going to throw in another mathematical equivalency here. Is implied by and implies higher standards of living. Standards of living. All that I'm saying, it is impossible to increase the standards of living without increasing productivity per worker. It is impossible to increase standards of living without increasing growth. We got to put in arrows here, right? Going up. And of course, growth means that you must get productivity and results in higher standards of living, or a different way is saying is higher productivity drives higher growth and higher standards of living. These 3, each one necessarily implies that the other 2 are present. So, in a macroeconomic logic, as long as you can get to 1 of the 3, you immediately conclude that the other 2 are always present. Are you guys happy for today? Is good enough? Did you guys understand, bro? Wow, alright, okay, thank you. Done.